We start recapping week 8 with the headlines, and my headline's a little different to start, and that's Jacksonville. Jacksonville's 13-4 in their last 17 games. They beat Pittsburgh at Pittsburgh. Tough weather. Weird game going in. The line was only 2.5, so you're kind of like, wait, do people think Pittsburgh is good here? Is it a weather-related thing? Is Jacksonville not really that good? Well, they wake up today to the 3 seed in the AFC after the win. The how good are they part of it? Because I was watching them, I go, look, this is different. It's different because Trevor Lawrence on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8, I think has a chance. I think he has a chance to actually move the sticks a little bit, right? And that to me is like the most important thing about that position, whether it's college or it's pro or thinking any of these teams that actually have a chance of winning their conference. I feel like Jacksonville has some stuff, at least when you look at the resume of how they've been winning and how we think of the AFC, that they need to be taken seriously. But there's a lot of stats that don't necessarily point to anything all that special. Their defense, as far as yards allowed per play, is middle of the pack in the NFL. The opposing points per game is 10th now, which is good in 23. It was 12th in 22. The offensive yards per play, they've been middle of the pack for a while. On third down conversions, my whole third and long thing, they're actually not that good. So that might just be the idea of Lawrence as opposed to the stats, because they're not really converting third downs at a great rate. They're 22nd in the NFL, but they do get off the field. And this may be the accumulation of talent, especially Josh Allen at the edge. And Walker had a better game yesterday. But they are getting off the field, or they're getting the other team off the field. They're 5th in opposing third down conversion rate. Lawrence is definitely a tick better. Some of the numbers versus last year are better. But then you're like, okay, well, how come they have these middling stats in some of these categories, but they have this record? Well, you immediately have to look at turnover margin. They were 6th coming in, but facing a Pittsburgh team that was actually 3rd. So what does a win against Pittsburgh, who was 4-2 at that point, mean? There's 2 ways of looking at it. If you watch the entire game, which this is one that I had on for the entire time, Jacksonville was clearly the better football team. They also kept Pittsburgh in this game throughout. I would say it felt like, here's like, I'm not going to say like up until 50 minutes you didn't know, because you still felt like you knew. But here's a perfect example. It's 7-3 going into the end of the half. And when Pittsburgh had the ball, I'm like, wait, is Pittsburgh going to score a touchdown here and then be up? Actually, it was 9-3. Are they going to be up 10-9? And then you're going to be sitting there after 30 minutes going, how the hell is Pittsburgh leading this football game? But that's the NFL. It would have been a classic NFL situation. Pittsburgh got screwed on the offsides penalty call on the field goal attempt. Pickett also got blasted on that last series there at the very end. 2 different quarterbacks going out late in games, or not late in this situation, but late in the first half. Cousins, obviously, with Minnesota a little bit later on, which we'll get to. But as I'm watching it all play out, I'm going, wait, this is a game? And part of it's the turnovers for Jacksonville. They had a fumble. They had a terrible Lawrence red zone interception. It was on first down. I don't know what he was looking for, if he was trying to throw the football away. Then they fumbled it on their first possession of the second half. So Jacksonville, who's usually pretty good in turnover margin, at least this season, thinking, okay, they're keeping Pittsburgh in this the entire time. But for the most part, I'm left looking at Jacksonville with this record of 13-4 over the last 17, making the playoffs last year, having the big comeback, and feeling like they've been attention drafting behind Kansas City, behind Buffalo, behind Cincinnati, and even Baltimore, as far as like who we're really paying attention to, who we think can come out of this. Now, Cincinnati we'll get to here in a second. Buffalo's got their own issues. Kansas City, weird loss. Baltimore's defense, I want to mention that a little bit later. But halfway through the season, Jacksonville definitely has to be seen as a real threat. Cincinnati, finally, 4-3 now, 9 seed in the AFC. They're actually behind the Jets as of today, but they've won 4 of their last 5. The Titans' loss was so bad in this stretch that it's like, wait, is Cincinnati actually going to be good? Because against Tennessee, they lost 27-3. They were outgained 400 to 211 yards, and they were even in turnover. So it wasn't some crazy turnover game where they feel like they just gave this one away. But this is the best Burrow has been all season long and since he's win at San Francisco. I mean, by far. Chase even said, quote, "Welcome back, Burrow, welcome back." Logan Wilson, linebacker, Wyoming, 10 interceptions since 2020. It's 4 more than any other linebacker in the NFL. And Burrow, as far as the health stuff, like, I'm like you probably don't know what to really believe. Everybody says the right things. Then sometimes you're like, is he playing bad or is it really the calf? Well, they were adamant that he was actually this was the healthiest he had been all season long, and it definitely looked like it. So on the other side, you have this Purdy issue where you're like, wait, what happened here? Because anytime somebody, as I've mentioned far too often when I love talking about quarterbacks, being like, wait, is he just this smart dude who doesn't make any mistakes and he's perfect for Shanahan? Or are we starting to see the general Shanahan decline of some of these younger quarterbacks that come along? You're like, man, Nick Mullins, CJ Beathard, like, look, he's finding a way with these guys. I mean, Garoppolo was there a lot longer, so it was a little bit different. But do people start to figure out, like, is this why it's too bad Shanahan can't ever get one of these high ceiling guys? Because eventually people start to figure him out a little bit. I don't know the answer to that. Booger McFarland, who we love, and he had a really interesting tweet. I thought he talked about the Bear front. It's a defense. Buddy Ryan apparently originated this thing a long time ago. The Bear front is where you have your tackle, your defensive tackles, and you have your two other down defensive linemen directly over the center and then both guards. And you're essentially playing with five guys down on the line of scrimmage, which the downside could be if you don't win at the line of scrimmage, you don't have as many people to rally to the tackle. But Booger said, hey, Bear front by Philly against Miami, Bear front by Cincinnati's defense against San Francisco. Again, those guys would understand it a lot better than I would. And the picks late, you're like, wait, the Purdy pick against Minnesota where he threw it, that's kind of his throw, that 15 to 20 yards down the field, middle of the field, throw it in the pocket. Kittle's coming underneath. Debo's coming underneath. Granted, they don't have Debo. They don't have Trent, so maybe that's part of it. But it's definitely concerning if you're the Niners, but it's great for Cincinnati to finally look like Cincinnati. Last headline is protect your QBs. Yesterday, we saw Brett Rippon in. Apparently, Stafford hurt his thumb hitting a helmet, but then aggravated again after they ran him in for a touchdown catch. Jaron Hall in. It sucks for Kirk Cousins. He was so good. Had I done the show differently, I guess, depending on how we were doing some of the content, his game against San Francisco, that's one of the best Kirk Cousins games I've ever seen. Not just the numbers, his toughness. I know I'm not the biggest Kirk Cousins fan, but he was incredible in that game, and now he's just cost himself a ton of money with his Achilles injury. Taylor Heineke got in for Desmond Ridder. He's better than Ridder is, but Ridder's going to get the chance because he's the recent draft pick, and they put the resources into it. He was checked for concussion, but apparently cleared. Then afterwards, Arthur Smith was a little weird about, no, he wasn't pulled because of his play. Well, he probably was pulled because of his play. Will Levis, he originally was going to get the start for the Titans anyways. Tannehill was hurt. He was terrific. He lit it up. So maybe he shouldn't be on this list. Minshew's already the starter because Anthony Richardson's hurt. Mitch Trubisky got in there, who loved being down 20-10 to Jacksonville, just throwing it to 5 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. Like, eventually, you look at some of the scores, and this happened with Purdy a little bit yesterday, too, where you're like, do you guys know the score? Do not, like, I'll get to Mahomes in a second and why he's different than everybody else for a million different reasons. P.J. Walker's in because Deshaun's hurt. I thought we were going to get Darnold. And then we get Tommy DeVito, who was in for Tyrod Taylor, who's in for Daniel Jones. The point is this, is I know everybody hates some of these calls that'll happen with quarterbacks, and some of them are egregious. They're terrible. There's a point. The quarterback safety thing is actually the right thing. So even every now and then, you're 7 hours on Sunday or 10 hours with the late game, how annoyed you're going to get about some flag that shouldn't have happened. Well, you should actually be rooting for those flags. Because if we get Tommy DeVito, Zach Wilson all the time, you're not going to be as into it. Speaking of awards time, the Thanksgiving award goes to the Jets and Giants. And I was thankful that was not a Sunday Night Football game because normally it would be. This was incredible. Well, it was terrible, but the numbers from it are just more punts than points, 25-23. Red Zone said there was 15 combined punts in this game between the Giants and Jets, which was the most combined punts in the first half of a game since they started tracking it 23 years ago. And the Giants had -9 net passing yards on the game. So nothing necessarily against DeVito and Wilson, but if we didn't prioritize protecting quarterbacks, if we didn't have the bad flag every now and then, if this was the matchup you were getting by week 10 in almost half the games, the league would not be as strong. The best win, it's Denver at home against Kansas City. Granted, I could have picked Cincinnati against San Francisco, but I already used that one. This is a great example of a couple different things. Now, granted, Mahomes, flu game for him. Apparently he was sick, felt better leading up to the game. Mahomes, you still expect to do everything, so maybe that was part of the problem. The 5 turnovers are probably the bigger issue. Now, the second interception from Mahomes, you look back, if somebody will run through a game log and start saying, he's getting a little loose with the football, he's making bad decisions. That's okay. At times, I think we've seen a few of those things with him. But the second interception was 4th and 22. And the difference is Mahomes actually went for it. And he'll throw that pick. Like, he doesn't care. He's not worried about his QBR. He's going to make that throw. There's other guys that I swear half the league would check it down on 4th and 22 with no chance. The fact that Kansas City even had a chance in this one when it was -4 in the giveaway takeaway, but 5 total turnovers, is a lot like the Philadelphia Jets game. We were like, how is this a game? Well, most teams, if they were -4 or -5 in turnovers, have no shot to even compete in a game, and yet they still could. Denver had 5 possessions inside Kansas City territory. Wilson, no picks now in 4 of his last 5 games. He had the 2 against Kansas City just a few weeks ago where he threw for only 95 yards. Everybody watched that game. I'm not telling you Wilson's necessarily back, but he was good enough, and I don't want to do a Zach Wilson wins. Hey, he's been okay. No, he hasn't. You scored 13 points. I really like some Bryce Young throws yesterday, and I love for him as the number 1 pick, winning head-to-head against CJ, who's been the better quarterback as a rookie so far. There were some nice Bryce Young moments, but, he's a rookie. The standard's a little different. But sometimes these guys will score 15, 17 points in a game. We're like, he made the right plays. But, dude, they're just not scoring enough. What are we talking about? So for Kansas City losing this one, it could also be the worst loss. So I'm just going to do that. See above, because Denver was 0-12 against Mahomes, and they finally got one. Numbers you should know. Let's go back to Burrow. So Burrow's throws 10-plus air yards so far this season. Week 1 through 4, 29% completion rate. Weeks 5 through 8, 61% completion rate. This is who he is. I know there were a lot of jokes about the contract. I know it really looked ugly. And yes, we've referenced the Tennessee game, but I feel like he is back. And that's the version of him that we saw yesterday that you should expect to see, because that's kind of who he's been since he's come in the league. The yards on those throws, 191 to 321 in the same amount of games, and touchdown interception ratio weeks 1 through 4 on 10-plus air yard throws, 0 touchdowns, 2 picks, 4 touchdowns, 2 picks. The last number you should know here, Baltimore. Now, Arizona was down. They beat Arizona, but they were down 31-15. So we could look back in a couple weeks going, man, that was kind of a close game, because it ended up being 31-24. It kind of wasn't. Arizona, I think, scored, 17 points in the fourth quarter. Arizona, for whatever reason, is far more competitive than we would have thought, despite the 1-7 record. They play hard, and it might be the worst talent on any roster in the NFL. So, Jonathan Gannon, finding a way to get this group to compete here. But the big thing is that Baltimore's 6-2, and here's the number. Not that they're number 2 in defensive yards allowed per game, still behind number 1 Cleveland, but they're number 1 in opponents' points per game in the NFL. Just over 15 points per game is what they're giving up. They did throw up a weird graphic comparing them to the Super Bowl defense of 20-plus years ago. I do not like that. I don't like anything ever being compared to that Ravens defense. Granted, I was too young to really appreciate the Bears, other than I thought the Super Bowl shuffle video was really cool and the sunglasses and everything. But I don't want anything to be compared to that Ravens defense, because I think for a single season, I know I've never seen anything like it. However, with this group, and I don't know that you'd look at Baltimore's front. I know Roquan's been terrific, but I don't know that you'd look at their front and say that's how you'd want to build your defensive roster. But this coaching staff is incredible. McDonald to DC, and it's another team kind of thrown into this mix with Baltimore, Jacksonville, Cincinnati being confusing, Buffalo feeling like they have their issues, the Kansas City loss, I'm not going to put a ton on that, and Miami feeling like, okay, they kill the bad teams, again, beating up on New England, but how are they against the good teams? It feels like the top of the AFC is loaded in a different way than we expected.